Hey everyone, it is Josh Black here. I'm the pastor of junior high and high school ministries at our Fanshawe location, North Park Fanshawe. I'm so glad that you decided to join us here on our weekend video for grades 6 to 8 students, our junior high video. And this week we are jumping into a brand new series called The Big Questions. So I'm not going to give you any more than that for this morning, for right now. We're going to jump into the video and then I'll be back at the end to give us a little bit of something to think about and then something that we can talk about in our families or ask questions with our friends throughout the rest of this week. All right, you ready? Okay, here we go.
What's up, my friends? My name is Italo, like Italy, but instead of the Y, the O at the end. I am so excited to be hanging out with you today. What I love so much about students is the questions you ask. In fact, I keep track of all the random questions students ask me in a note on my phone, and they're such a good questions. Let me show you some. Is ketchup really a smoothie? Is the WWE fake? Come on, guys, it's real. How many different types of squirrels are there? Is it possible to not have a belly button? I know one person who doesn't. Why do armpits smell? Where did dinosaurs go? Can I get sick from eating too many ketchup packets? And some of these questions are pretty easy to answer. And some of the questions I have collected are a little bit more difficult to answer, like, is God really real? Will my grandma know it's me when I see her in heaven? Did Noah know that he had two of every kind of animal he needed to have? If God loves us, then why do bad things happen? Why do I have to be kind to people who have talked about me behind my back? What does it actually mean to follow Jesus? Honestly, that last one is one I have asked before myself. It is one that I think most of us have thought about a time or two, maybe 3. Maybe it's one you have been thinking about today as you show up here at church. What does it actually mean to follow Jesus? It's a pretty big question, right? I bet if you ask 10 different people here, you will get 10 different answers. And that can make figuring out what it really means to follow Jesus kind of confusing. And to be honest, we all have questions about what it means to follow Jesus. I think that's because it's a pretty big question with a lot of different answers. Maybe to you, it means showing up at church every week or participating in your group. That definitely has to be part of following Jesus, right? Or maybe it's more about doing things every day like journaling, praying, reading your Bible, listening to music. If you do that, you are following Jesus, right? Maybe you think following Jesus is about following the rules. It's more about what you do not do. You don't go to those parties, you don't say those bad words, you don't lie to your parents, you don't date that person who isn't making wise choices. Sometimes it might even feel like following Jesus means you don't get to have a lot of fun, right? Or maybe you hear the phrase following Jesus and you are not quite sure what it means. Maybe you wonder if following Jesus is the same as choosing to believe in Jesus. If that's you, I'm so glad you are here today for this conversation. I don't know about you, but when I look at all the stuff we think following Jesus is actually about, I find myself asking some other big questions. Is this really it? Is following Jesus really just about songs we listen to, or the church we attend, or the words we don't say? Is this what it really is about? For all the things we might have heard about how Jesus is life-changing, miracle worker, history maker, does following him really just come down to a long list of do's and don'ts? Well, I think when it comes to our biggest questions, we need better answers. We are not the only people that ask big questions about what it means to follow Jesus. It's actually a question people have been asking for a long time. In fact, some of the very first people to at least think about this question were some of Jesus' closest friends, his disciples. The word disciple is just a fancy way to say follower. So it makes sense that Jesus' followers will be the people trying to figure this whole thing out. 2 of the first people Jesus asked to follow him were fishermen named Peter and Andrew. And we find the start of their journey with Jesus written down in the New Testament of the Bible. It is an historical document written by a guy named Matthew. Matthew was actually a follower of Jesus himself. He wrote down what he experiences with Jesus so that we could know what happened during Jesus' life, so that we could see for ourselves that knowing Jesus changed everything. And a lot of the things Matthew wrote down can help us figure out how knowing Jesus changes everything. they can help us see what it actually looks like to follow Jesus. So let's take a look. One day, as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fish for a living. Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed him. Now, even though this all seems to happen pretty quickly, both Peter and Andrew had probably heard Jesus teaching before. Jesus had been preaching throughout the region, so they probably heard the things he had said. They knew what kind of person he was. But even though they knew Jesus and his reputation, Peter and Andrew had to still wonder what he meant when he said, "Follow me." Where are we going? For how long? And why? What does that even mean? During the time of Jesus, the rabbis, who were the religious leaders of the day, had disciples who will literally follow them all around. These disciples took every step their rabbi took. If their rabbi went left, so did their disciple. If the rabbi stopped suddenly, so would their disciple. So Peter and Andrew would probably have thought at the very least following Jesus meant walking in the same directions, following him every step of the way, listening to his every word, and seeing how he responded in everyday situations. Jesus was saying, right now, let's go at this very moment, just as you are. Go where I go, do things I do, hang out with me. But the reality is, Jesus meant so much more than that when he asked Peter and Andrew to follow him. Peter and Andrew were fishermen. They were used to catching fish day in and day out. What Jesus asked them was an invitation to do something totally different than what they're used to do. It was probably different than what they thought a religious teacher would ask them to do. I mean, notice what Jesus didn't say here. He didn't say, "Get good grades on your religious test and follow me. Go to church more and follow me. Be good and follow me. Sing more worship songs and follow me. Change the things you wear and follow me. Don't hang out with those people and follow me." No! Jesus simply asked Peter and Andrew to follow. Just as they were, they could walk with him. And immediately they did. I probably would have been like, "Okay, bro, but can you at least tell me where are we going first?" But these guys just went and followed. Of course, they could not have imagined where the journey would take them. But in that moment, they responded the best they could with what they did understand. They knew who Jesus was, and they knew he was inviting them to come with him. Now, spoiler alert, the journey was crazy for these guys. It was crazy for all of the men and women who followed Jesus around. Let me give you some highlights. They went on this wild road trip with Jesus for 3 years. They saw some crazy stuff like Jesus walking on the water and healing people, performing miracles. Once, he even brought a middle school girl back to life from the dead. True story, man. Jesus, who invited them to a journey, was actually killed. The disciple had to hide to save their life after that. Then Jesus came back to life. Jesus sent his disciples out on a mission to tell other people about him, so those people will follow him too. Peter and Andrew went on to become leaders in the Christian faith. Peter actually became one of the first leaders, the one the other followers looked to for direction. John, another disciple, became a famous writer, and more people are named after him than anyone else. Nearly all Jesus' disciples were killed for following him. All are famous. And thousands of years later, here we are, spending time together talking about just one part of Peter and Andrew's story. So what Jesus meant when he asked Andrew and Peter to follow him was so much bigger than following a bunch of rules or reading the Bible every day. What Jesus had in mind for Peter and Andrew and for us was a life that was bigger and more adventurous and more meaningful and more impactful than any of them could ever imagine when they were just fishermen. Jesus had more in mind for who Andrew and Peter would become. He had more in mind for how much they would matter in the world. In other words, following Jesus changed everything in Andrew and Peter's life, especially in the areas that matter most. We can imagine that the two of them had a ton of questions about what following Jesus would have meant for their life. But they were taking the next step in following Jesus without knowing all the answers. They were trusting him step by step as they went. And the same is true for us. Because following Jesus isn't about having it all figured out or doing all the right things. It's about simply saying yes to go with him and trusting him to lead you as you go. And when you do, you will experience how knowing Jesus changes everything. I have known this to be true on my own life, and I want you to experience how knowing Jesus will change everything as you follow him too. So, can you try 2 things for me this week? First, think about it. What do you think it means to follow Jesus? Be honest here. Is it a checklist, a bunch of do's and don'ts, something you are not even sure you believe in? Whatever it is, I want you to consider that there might be more to it. Following Jesus might be bigger than you think. It might actually change everything. You might have a lot of questions about it, but what if simply by taking a step to follow Jesus might help you find some answers? This week, I want you to think about what following Jesus might mean for your life right now. Then, talk about it. Here's what's cool about this. Jesus isn't afraid of your big questions. So, be open with him. Talk about your questions. Pray about your questions. Share your questions with your group. That's actually why we have groups here. We want groups to be a safe space where you can ask the questions you have about all this faith stuff together. Because the reality is that we all have questions. None of us have all this figured out, even adults. But the good news is that we were not meant to figure it out alone. So share one of your big questions with your group today. And as you talk about your questions, be open to how Jesus might be asking you to follow him to help you find some answers. Because the truth is that knowing Jesus changes everything. He changed everything for Peter and Andrew. He has changed everything for me, and he can change everything for you too.
And welcome back, everybody. So again, we know that knowing Jesus changes everything. And as a youth ministry, as a church, as a group of people gathering here, even on a video this morning, we want to encourage you to think about the big questions of what it means to follow Jesus. What are the big questions that you have? How can you process some of those big questions? Is it with someone in your family? Is it with a friend? Maybe a trusted adult in your life? How is it that knowing Jesus changes our lives, and what are the big questions you have about that? Now, the question that I have for you today, something to talk about again in your families, around the dinner table, or with some friends, is what does it mean to be a follower of something or of someone? What does that mean? What does it mean? We're going to leave it at that. And again, next week we'll be back with week 2 of the big questions. I hope you enjoy this series. I hope you enjoy the way it thinks about your relationship with Jesus and what it means to follow Jesus, because it changes everything. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you again next week.